Welcome to the Food Junkies podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
Is cancer a metabolic disease that can be prevented by avoiding ultra-processed food? Welcome to Food Junkies podcast. My name is Dr. Vera and I'm your host today, speaking with oncology researcher Dr. Thomas Seyfried. Dr. Seyfried is an American professor of biology, genetics, and biochemistry at Boston College. He has dedicated his career to studying chronic diseases such as cancer, epilepsy, and neurodegenerative disorders. Dr. Seyfried got his Ph.D. in genetics and biochemistry from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign in 1976 and completed a postdoc fellowship in neurology at Yale University School of Medicine, where he also served as an assistant professor. His publications include over 200 peer-reviewed articles and a 2012 book, Cancer as Metabolic Disease. Dr. Seyfried argues that cancer is primarily a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and that metabolic therapies such as ketogenic diets and caloric restriction may be better ways to manage cancer rather than traditional chemotherapies. We at Food Junkies are particularly interested in the role that sugar and ultra-processed food play in the development of cancer. So welcome, Dr. Seyfried.
Thank you very much, Vera. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. What led you to challenge the traditional genetic mutation theory of cancer?
I have a degree in genetics, and having classes in human genetics where cancer was always discussed in the light of a genetic problem. I didn't challenge that. I just thought that's the way it was. And everybody receives many people got Nobel Prizes, received Nobel Prizes for oncogenes and this kind of stuff. And when you teach classes, you just regurgitate what the textbooks tell us without really delving into the situation. I figured these guys must know what they're doing. But when I we worked in epilepsy for many years, and we were working on metabolic approaches to managing epileptic seizures. But at the same time, we had a grant from the NIH to study angiogenesis in tumors. I had parallel programs going at the same time. One was on the glycolipid composition of tumors, brain tumors that I developed at Yale University because we were interested in glycolipid biochemistry. And then we were able to link glycolipid biochemistry to controlling angiogenesis, which is the abnormal vascularization of incipient tumors. So we had this parallel program with, on one side, I was using natural models of epilepsy, and on the other side, I was using natural models of cancer, brain cancer to be specific. And the two programs were parallel, but not at all overlapping, until we started to realize that calorie restriction and ketogenic diets that were managing epileptic seizures were also managing cancer in a very profound way. It shut down the angiogenesis, reduced inflammation. It was targeting all the pathways that were linked to angiogenesis and inflammation in the tumor. At the same time, it was reducing epileptic seizures in mice that had epilepsy. So the two parallel paths started to cross. And I was surprised about how powerful ketogenic diets were to manage epileptic seizures. And when I was at Yale, that's where I did a lot of my work in epilepsy there. And that was the center of epilepsy research at Yale University at that time in Department of Neurology. And I said, I wonder if I should use this ketogenic. Oh, no, nobody's interested. They told me, forget it, passé. Nobody's interested. So I wrote a grant up internally to Yale to get money to study ketogenic diet for epilepsy management. And they said no. And everybody said that's a waste of time. So I didn't think much of it, and that was back in the early 80s. And then when I came here to BC, we were working on epilepsy. We're trying to map genes for epilepsy. I wasn't really doing much diet or any of this kind of stuff. But one of my students came to me and said, oh, there's a big talk about ketogenic diets for epilepsy out on the West Coast. Jim Abrams, a movie maker, guy who made the airplane movies and this kind of thing. His son, Charlie, had epilepsy, and was essentially cured using ketogenic metabolic therapy, ketogenic diets. And he had Meryl Streep, the famous actress, do a study, a movie, First Do No Harm. And then a big group of people started to get excited about ketogenic diets and epilepsy, even though Yale said, no, it's not. I set up one of the early special workshops at the American Epilepsy Society to bring more attention to ketogenic diets and epilepsy. And then we had Eric Kossoff and a bunch of others from Johns Hopkins and the late John Freeman. And we started to collect more and more people really excited about ketogenic diets for epilepsy. And then we realized it was largely calorie restriction. If you didn't restrict the diet, you didn't get protection against seizures. And we found the same thing in the cancer. When the mice ate as much ketogenic diet, tumors would go wild. But it was, again, calorie restriction. And it was restricted diets that worked both against seizures and against cancer. We still don't know the mechanism by which ketogenic diets and fasting work against cancer. It's definitely linked to the levels of blood sugar, but we're still confused about what role elevation of ketone bodies, basically beta hydroxybutyrate, have in managing epileptic seizures. And it's a very exciting area, and a lot of people are writing grants trying to figure this out. But when I looked more into the cancer problem, it became clear to me that the linkage to what we were seeing in cancer with calorie restriction and ketogenic diet restriction linked back to Otto Warburg's work in cancer. And he was the giant biochemist from the 20th century. And he clearly showed that cancer was a metabolic problem and that was inefficient in cancer cells, leading them to produce lactic acid as a waste product of a fermentation metabolism. I was seeing the same thing in my own work. And then I started to question, what the hell are they talking about with all these gene mutations and everything else? Yes. So it became, then I said, why? And then we got into a big discussion. Oh, no, the gene mutations make the cancer cell ferment. And I said, oh, yeah, how does that work?
Let's just go back to what was the traditional or semantic theory of cancer. Tell us in simple terms how we understood cancer, how it's different than healthy cells.
The person who was linked to the origin of cancer as a genetic disease was this German scientist called Theodor Boveri. Boveri was famous because he was one of the first to link chromosomes to Mendelian factors. When Gregor Mendel first did his work on pea plants, there was no biology associated with it. It was purely ratios of colored leaves and petals and tall and short and purple and green and all these kinds of things. But he had no clue what was the biology for what he was seeing these ratios. It was Theodor Boveri who linked, and Walter Sutton, a grad student at Columbia. Those two guys were the first ones to link Mendel's traits to chromosomes. But at the same time, Theodor Boveri was working on looking at tumor cells. And he said, oh, looks like some of these tumor cells have broken chromosomes, and maybe that's responsible for the dysregulated growth, which is cancer. Cancer is dysregulated cell growth. So he speculated in 1914 that tumors have broken chromosomes and some abnormalities in the way chromosomes line up on the metaphase plate, and maybe that's responsible for the dysregulated growth. But he apologizes. I'm just speculating here. I have no clue. I never studied cancer, know nothing about cancer, and probably everything that I'm saying is wrong, and it will come to light that I am wrong. But he was embraced as the father of the somatic mutation theory because when Watson and Crick outlined the structure of DNA, and DNA started to explode as the genetic material, the structure of the genetic material itself with strands of DNA. And then soon after it was recognized, besides the chromosomal abnormalities, some gene mutations were found in cancer cells. And the field, like lemmings, ran off the cliff chasing genes. And then, of course, it became more and more involved in how many different kinds of genetic abnormalities you could find in tumor cells. And that persisted all through the 1960s and early 70s. And the Warburg's idea, he was the giant in the field of cancer, and he wrote a profound summary of the field in 1956 and was attacked by several people who made assumptions now since cleared up were all incorrect. Both Warburg and those attacking him were all fighting over things that were shown to be inaccurate. But the field dumped him and ran off chasing genes. And then Nobel Awards were given to individuals that found tumor suppressor genes, oncogenes, and these kinds of things. And then this justified the establishment of the Cancer Genome Atlas, which was a multi-million-dollar investment by the National Institutes of Health into a huge comprehensive analysis of a sequencing database of all major cancers that we know of: the breast cancer project, the brain cancer project, the lung cancer, the pancreatic cancer. So they all had these massive investment in deep sequencing. And what developed from that were the technologies that were exploding to analyze the sequences of base pairs and genes and thousands of genes simultaneously. So the technology in the field of molecular biology exploded based on the investment in the Cancer Genome Atlas, but it wasn't having any significant impact on reducing the death rate. More and more studies came out, people scratching their heads, what's going on here? Seems like every cell in a tumor has a different genetic profile. No two cells in any tumor have the same kinds of mutations or chromosomal abnormalities. So then they stood back a little bit, the field, and said, not all these mutations really play a role in dysregulated cell growth, but only some of them, and we call them driver genes. So then the field got all excited all over again, and they went on this big hunt for driver genes, leading to the production of immunotherapies, which are today considered the state of the art for cancer management, because we're going to target the effects of driver genes in cancer cells using immunotherapies to specifically precision medicine, killing these things. And
actually, is that essentially what chemotherapy is?
Chemotherapy is many different kinds. Immunotherapy is targeting epitopes on tumor cells, markers on tumor cells created by mutations in the genome. Chemotherapy was traditionally a toxic chemical that would just stop cell division. And that's why you go bald and your gut's all screwed up and all kinds of things, because it was stopping the division of any cell dividing. We have cells in the gut that divide. We have hair follicles that divide. We have a lot of cells that divide naturally. But toxic chemo, doxorubicin, Red Death, and they have these names for these things. Doses of high-dose radiation. We have these poisonous chemicals. They block either DNA repair. They cause DNA mutation, DNA damage. They block the cytoskeleton. They're extremely toxic kinds of things. And they were designed to just stop cell proliferation because cancer was cell division out of control. But it was like carpet bombing your whole body. So precision medicine came in based on the Cancer Genome Atlas, where we're going to target specific markers on the surface of cancer cell. We're going to take our immune cells, T cells and B cells, and we're going to train them to go after these tumor cells and make it a lot more precision. And that's why they call precision medicine. And it was based on the development of immunotherapies, all based on the somatic mutation theory.
And how effective were they?
And that's what we see advertised every night on television. Opdivo, Keytruda. We have the specific treatment for your specific cancer, and this is all part of the somatic mutation theory, just a different branch, so to speak, of the somatic mutation theory. And yet we look, and every year the American Cancer Society tells us how many dead people we have. And right now, the latest came out, we have 1,700 people a day dying from cancer, which comes to about 70 people per hour. Yeah. And this doesn't go down. This goes up every year. What are all those supposedly precision medicine? What are they doing? And they tell you in no uncertain terms on television in the evening, because they don't come out during football or basketball games. They come out when older folks are watching the evening news. Then you get bombarded with all these cancer drugs and all this kind of stuff. And they clearly say in the 1 minute time frame of their commercial, 60% of that 1 minute is telling you how this is going to kill you, how this drug is going to kill you or make your life miserable. All right. So I said, wow, this is really amazing. People are going to go out and take any kind of a medication that has a remote possibility of killing them? What are people, nuts? Why would anyone with any moral fiber come on the TV and tell you take something that has a chance of killing you? And the idea, we looked into this, and it's called hyperprogressive disease, which is where the therapy itself will kill you before the tumor does. It attacks your liver because those same markers that are on the tumor cells can also be on your kidneys and liver and some other organ. So when you're giving it to kill the tumor cells, you blow your liver and kidney out at the same time. You die before the cancer kills you. It's called hyperprogressive disease. Every oncologist knows this. And they say it. They don't call it hyperprogressive disease. They say, this drug can kill you. So I said, whoa, this is really interesting. And they're making billions of dollars selling it to poor people that don't know what's going on. Now, there are success stories. Don't get me wrong, because we have success with toxic poisonous chemo and we have success with immunotherapies. The problem is we have a lot of failures and tragedies also associated with these things. But when you look back at what Otto Warburg said, and we have confirmed now that Otto Warburg was essentially correct, and we have cleared up a lot of the mess that was misinformation and misunderstanding of the biology. It is clear that all these tumors, regardless of where they come from, breast, colon, brain, bladder, melanomas, blood cancers, they're all fermenting, which means their energy is being driven by a non-oxygen process. They don't use oxygen. So they ferment. That's an ancient way of generating energy without oxygen. And all these cancers that we study, that we look at, are all fermenters. So I said, what do they ferment? What is their fuel to get energy without oxygen? And it comes to the sugar glucose and the amino acid glutamine. And we interrogated all these cells. So we know what the hell. Other people, they can't live without glucose and glutamine, and they can't switch to fatty acids or ketone bodies. So we know that. And that's the simplest damn thing. This cancer is not as complicated as everybody made it out to be. It's only complicated when you have a misunderstanding about the origin of disease. If it's a somatic mutation disease, like they say, then it's hopelessly complicated. But if it's a mitochondrial metabolic disease, it's embarrassingly simple.
Okay, so we've got the traditional and how they were off on the wrong hypothesis. And now we're on to the newer idea, your idea, which is the metabolic hypothesis. Can you start with that, explaining what that is? And by the way, fermenting, that just means carbohydrates, right? Or can
you can ferment amino acids. That was our big discovery. Oh. You can use the amino acids in our body. We have them circulating in our bloodstream. The most abundant amino acid in the human bloodstream is glutamine. It's an amino acid. And it keeps our gut healthy. It keeps our immune system healthy, our urea cycle. We need glutamine. It's a very abundant amino acid in our bodies. And the cancer cells need it as well. So we know that's a big breakthrough. That's not known by the majority of people. That I would say what I'm telling you right now is not known by 90% of oncologists. No matter what I'm saying right now is not known by 90% of the people treating others for cancer.
Start at the basis of what you mean by metabolic hypothesis.
Okay, so the issue here is what is the disease? It's called cancer. What is cancer? Cell division out of control, dysregulated cell growth. Yeah. What is causing the cells to be growing out of control, no longer regulated? Is it a mutation in the genome, or is it an inefficiency of the ability of the cell to generate energy through oxygen? Because you're breathing, I'm breathing, and if you and I did not breathe, we would be dead. And the fastest way to prove that is take cyanide. If you take cyanide right now, and I take cyanide right now, we would be both face down on the computer right in front of we would be both dead in the same amount of time. In about a minute and a half, we'd be dead. Why? Because our cells are using oxygen. Cyanide blocks energy utilization from oxygen. The interesting thing, like Warburg and we and others have shown, cancer cells can survive in cyanide. That tells us right there they're not using the same energy that we're using. Why is a cancer cell resistant to cyanide? Because it uses a non-oxygen dependent energy metabolism, which is called fermentation. And the fuels for that are glucose, the sugar that's abundant in our bodies, and the amino acid of glutamine. So those are the two fuels that drive energy in cancer cells.
Glutamine come from the ketones?
No, glutamine, the amino acid, glutamine. The glutamine is the amino acid.
And where does it come from?
It's in our blood. Our body makes it. It's called a non-essential amino acid because we can get it from the diet and we can also make it ourselves. So it's the most abundant amino acid. It's essential in many ways, but they call it a non-essential amino acid because we can make it from glucose. So it's something, but it's absolutely essential for a tumor cell. Tumor cells can't live without that fuel.
What dietary product would give you more of that?
It's everywhere. Plants, proteins. It's just you can't use diet to target glutamine.
Okay.
You can use diet to target glucose, but you can't use diet to target glutamine. When I've explained that, a lot of people say, oh, what can I do? I mean, you can do a lot of exercise to lower glutamine, but it's not going to lower it to the point where you're going to kill cancer cells. You've got to use a drug, and that's why we know these drugs that can do this.
Okay, so we've got the glutamate and we've got the
glutamine, not glutamate.
Sorry.
Glutamate is another amino acid made from glutamine. So glutamine is the key, glutamine. Glutamine is metabolized to glutamate, then to another, like you said, you didn't want me to get too deep, but we have to know the metabolic pathway that drives the energy from sources other than oxygen. And it's glutamine is metabolized to glutamate, which is then metabolized to a molecule in the TCA cycle. The Krebs cycle is alpha-ketoglutarate, succinyl-CoA, and that produces tremendous energy inside the mitochondria. This is why everybody was confused for so many decades, even Warburg. The mitochondrion is a spaghetti network in our cytoplasm that generates the massive amount of energy through oxygen. We breathe, the mitochondria in our cells makes the ATP, so you and I can speak and think and this kind of thing. So that's called the mitochondrion. It's an organelle in the cytoplasm of cells. And the oxygen that's consumed goes to the mitochondria, and it makes very highly efficient energy. And that was always thought to be the sole source of energy in the mitochondria. However, in cancer cells, we found out that the mitochondria can also produce a tremendous amount of energy with a fermentation of glutamine, which was never really understood or even discovered until we started looking at it in more detail. And I did this with my friend and colleague, Dr. Christos Shinopoulos from Semmelweis University in Budapest, Hungary. He's the world leader in the way that mechanism. So I teamed up with him because I had a suspicion that the cancer cells were gaining energy from inside the mitochondria by a mechanism that most people don't even know about or never heard about. And he didn't know, so he and I got together and he started looking at this and he said, yeah, these damn cancer cells, they're sucking down the glutamine and fermenting it. And this is new. This is, wow, we didn't know this. And a lot of people in the cancer field know that glutamine is an essential fuel for tumors, but they thought it was oxidized using oxygen. No, it's fermented. So that's a new concept now. I know it might seem complicated to the lay person, and they shouldn't feel they shouldn't feel that way because it's just as complicated and unknown to the oncologist. So so you can all join together and learn something new. Oncologist and layperson should know that the cancer cells are fermenting an amino acid to get energy. This is the detail. You need to know this in order to develop effective therapies for cancer. Because if you don't understand the biology and biochemistry of the very disorder you're studying, then the likelihood of developing effective therapies is going to be far off. And that's where we are today. We have 1,700 people a day dying from cancer because essentially they don't understand what I just said or refuse to accept it. They always come out with some superficial explanation. Well, you can't be right because 99% of the people in the cancer field think it's a genetic disease, and therefore I can't be right.
So getting back to your fermentation hypothesis, so you're saying that cancer cells are getting energy by this unique phenomena of fermentation. And so what does that now tell us about how people are getting cancer and potentially how they could prevent it?
Those are different issues. And don't forget, it's not just amino acid fermentation, it's glucose fermentation. Yes. Warburg knew that. That was the whole thing. They always thought it was just glucose. We have now know it's amino acid and glucose fermentation. So you can't manage cancer. If you have cancer, you must target those two fuels together at the same time and transition the body to ketosis, nutritional ketosis, because the tumor cell cannot use ketone bodies or fatty acids to replace glucose and glutamine. So we now know how to manage cancer. Now, the question you just asked is how do you prevent cancer is a different issue. So you have to know how cancer started in the first place. And cancer starts by damage to the mitochondria of the cells in our body. It might strike a breast cell, it might strike a bladder cell, it might strike a lung cell, a brain cell, a colon cell, a skin cell. Doesn't make any difference. A blood cell. Whatever damages chronically the ability of the cell to produce energy through oxygen, allowing the cell to transition to fermentation, leads to dysregulated cell growth. So the way you prevent cancer is you keep your mitochondria healthy, just like our Paleolithic ancestors. Cancer was unheard of. Who was around then? Nobody was around. But we have people living today according to their traditional ways that they lived by thousands and thousands of years. And several people have investigated these primitive tribes, and cancer is rare, extremely rare in tribes that exist according to their traditional ways, where they eat foods that are all natural. They have a lot of exercise. They're not exposed to as many carcinogens as other people. So you find out that in these tribes, cancer is extremely rare. And then as soon as the tribe adapts Western cultural diet and lifestyle, they get cancer, dementia, heart attacks. They get all the same stuff, diabetes. It's not a mystery. We know exactly how cancer starts. We know exactly the diet and lifestyle issues that all come together, not just one, the whole spectrum of things, leading to damage to the respiratory capacity of a cell, allowing that cell to transition slowly over to fermentation,
from
which
oxygen to fermentation.
then just leads to dysregulated cell growth, because the organelle that controls the differentiated quiescent state of the cell is the mitochondria. And if that organelle becomes corrupted or deficient, the cell falls back on ancient pathway of proliferation. It's so simple. I just find that it's, wow, how has nobody ever been able to find out about this stuff?
One question, maybe this will answer the question, that people often just get one cancer or two. The way you're describing it, it would suggest that a person could get multiple cancers because the mitochondria is being affected in the breast, in the colon.
Yeah, it could be at the origin a breast could have an occluded milk duct that would damage chronic inflammation around the occluded milk duct. You could have an irritation in the bowel from a kind of food or type of lifestyle that would irritate a cell in the bowel, which would then lead to colon cancer. You could have a bang on the head or a viral infection that would give you a brain tumor. Anything.
Are you serious? A bang on the head can give you a brain cancer?
A lot of people who have had brain tumors have had serious head injuries at one point or another. As a matter of fact, during the Second World War, publishing came out of Germany where some survivors of battles had shrapnel wounds in the head, and they developed glioblastoma around the shrapnel wound. Okay. That's actually how I started producing cancer in brain cancer in mice. I was putting shards of chemical carcinogen into the brain of a mouse, and he would develop glioblastomas. So
this is really showing how inflammation itself causes mitochondrial disrepair, which then can lead to cancer.
Absolutely. Inflammation, chronic inflammation is a precipitory factor for damaging oxidative phosphorylation. Absolutely. This is why you have type 2 diabetes. If you look at C-reactive protein in the bloodstream of a person with diabetes, often, not all, many people have elevated C-react, which is a marker for inflammation. Okay, so if I'm systemically inflamed, it could give me colon cancer, breast cancer if you're a female. It could give you bladder cancer. It could give you any kind. It depends on the genetic architecture of your tissue being subjected to that inflammatory insult at any given time. So clearly, and not only that, intermittent hypoxia. If you watch these guys that have sleep apnea, they stop breathing in the middle of the night. A lot of times it's associated with obesity. So you put obesity, sleep apnea, diabetes, you put all that together, man, you are a powder keg for cancer. And as a matter of fact, diabetes or obesity is replacing smoking as one of the great risk factors. And obesity has systemic inflammation, sleep apnea, all these kinds of things can be associated with that. And then you put on top of that microplastics and forever chemicals in your environment, highly processed carbohydrate foods. You throw all that stuff together and boom, you got an epidemic of cancer. It's not surprising. Yeah, you know exactly what's going on.
So you just mentioned ultra-processed food. Can you be specific about how that can cause cancer ultimately?
It contributes to systemic inflammation. You're eating foods that have no nutritional value. They're not helping our normal cells at all. So all you're doing is contributing to systemic inflammation and high blood sugar levels and damage to the body. Okay. And this, then we also know virus infections. You get papilloma virus, hepatitis C viruses. Yeah. We showed clearly how those viruses enter the mitochondria or the products, causing disruption of oxidative metabolism, leading to fermentation. And we put all the parts together, and we know exactly. It's very hard to get cancer if you keep your mitochondria healthy. How do you keep your mitochondria healthy? Do a hell of a lot of exercise every day. Don't eat highly processed carbohydrates. Keep your blood sugars low and your ketones elevated, just like our Paleolithic ancestors did. And then people say, I don't want to do that. I said, okay, I told you what you needed to do. Skip meals. Do a lot of exercise, and you reduce your risk. All it is reducing risk. It's not saying I can never get cancer. It's hard to get cancer if your mitochondria are healthy. Let's put it.
Ultra-processed food. Would it be fair to say that ultra-processed food and sugar are actually carcinogenic? Like, is that an accurate statement?
No, that's not accurate. That's not accurate. Sugar is not a carcinogen, and nor is highly processed carbohydrates are carcinogens. They're not carcinogens, but they can create systemic inflammation in the body, which can chronically damage oxidative phosphorylation. But to say that sugar or highly processed food is a carcinogen, that's not right. That's not right.
How is that not right? I can say that tobacco is a carcinogen.
Because you have molecules in tobacco that actually specifically damage oxidative phosphorylation. You have, and I showed this in my book, all these different kinds of carcinogens that we hear about, tetrahydrochloride, urethane, all of these things actually chronically, specifically disrupt oxidative phosphorylation. Sugar doesn't do this. Now, if you have cancer, that's a different issue. If you have cancer, the level of sugar in the blood will be provocative towards driving the dysregulated growth of that cancer. And there's dozens and dozens of we were the first ones to show the linkage between blood sugar and how fast the tumor could grow in our preclinical models of glioblastoma. The higher the blood sugar, the faster the tumor grows. The lower the blood sugar, the slower the tumor grows. And this was shown for breast cancer, bladder cancer, colon cancer, all these different cancers. So if you want your cancer to grow fast, you got to get your blood sugar as high as possible.
So is it fair to say that cancer or sugar feeds cancer?
Yes, it's actually glucose. So sugar, table sugar, is sucrose, which is fructose and glucose together. But the glucose molecule, yes, is an absolute fuel for driving the fermentation metabolism in the cytoplasm of the tumor. Yes.
Right.
Yes. And it's been shown over and over again. People who have high blood sugar and they have a metastatic cancer, they don't live long. You got to keep the blood sugar down, and you got to target the glutamine. The way you kill cancer is you got to target the glucose and glutamine together while transitioning the body over to nutritional ketosis.
Yeah.
Then you have a fighting chance. You have a chance to potentially live a lot longer than you would. Now, that doesn't mean you throw out immunotherapies and toxic radiation and all these other things. You can certainly use those, but you use them more strategically than the way we are using them today. We're using them as the upfront form of managing cancer. When you view cancer as a mitochondrial metabolic disease, you shrink the tumor first, you take away the inflammation, you make the rest of the body super healthy, and then you get the patient into a state of management, and then you could come in with some of the traditional radiation, chemo, and this kind of thing as a finishing off process.
So it's kind of like you're a nutritional oncologist first.
Yeah, you certainly need to know that. If you really want to be successful in managing cancer, you really need to know. Yes, the nutrition we didn't do a lot of work on the value of nutrition as much as I do on using food as medicine to target the availability of the glucose and glutamine. But all of this should, of course, be done under a nutritional paradigm that maintains normal macro and micronutrients so you don't harm or put the patient at risk. Don't forget, people say, I got to take all these vitamins. The damn tumor cells need those vitamins too. So just remember that.
Go ahead.
So they can't. So let's not make their life any more comfortable than it has to be.
Well, so you were suggesting keto or restricted diets. Is it the keto or is it the restricted calories?
It's both. And that's why we developed the glucose ketone index calculator. We published this based on how human beings were responding to metabolic therapy. It became clear to me more than 10 years ago that we were working with a young woman from France, an American lawyer who happened to live in France, and we were having her manage her blood sugar and ketone bodies independently of each other. And it was a real challenge. It caused her to have a lot of stress. She got into an argument she had a handicapped parking spot because she was suffering from a type of brain tumor, a brainstem kind of tumor. And she had a cane. And she was monitoring with various meters, a sugar meter and a ketone meter, independently of each other. She got into a fight with the guy who took her handicapped parking spot. And then she measured her blood sugar, and it was really high. super high, like up 150 milligram per deciliter. For someone without diabetes, that would be a spike. And she said, "Oh, my cancer is going to grow." And I said, "What's your ketones?" And she said, "Oh, no, it's at 2 millimolar." I said, "Wow, that's still pretty high." So I told my student, Josh Meidenbauer, I said, "We got to figure a way to make these people not so freaked out." And we developed a ratio of glucose to ketones in the blood. So you can take like a keto mojo meter, you can take a blood drop of blood like a diabetic would, and you can use the glucose stick and you get a glucose reading, and then you can take the ketone stick and get a ketone reading, push the button, and it gives you a ratio called the glucose ketone index. And if you keep an index about 2.0 or below, you're putting a hell of a lot of metabolic pressure on these tumor cells. And then you come in with strategic drugs to target the glutamine. Once the patient is into a nutritional ketotic state, the tumor cells are being hammered metabolically. And they're not growing very fast, and the inflammation is being shrunk up, and the body is just starting to make adjustments to this. They're fighting the tumors.
Is it possible to actually regress cancer just through this kind of nutritional approach?
Oh, absolutely. But it doesn't happen to everybody. So you can't, some people, I'm shocked. We've never been able to provide long-term management for our preclinical models using keto alone. We always have to target the glutamine together with the keto. And when you do that, you get much better results. The outcome is much better. So that's why, people always want a cure for cancer. And my view is, what the hell is wrong with long-term management? Why you always have to feel you're going to be cured? Because a lot of people, 1,700 people are dying a day here. They're not being cured, right? But wouldn't it be great if we could keep those 1,700 people a day living 5 or 10 times longer than they would? But maybe in 10 or 20 years they die or from something?
Isn't there also a thought that all of us have some level of cancer, but our immune system is suppressing it, and that a good nutritional approach would suppress that?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. They say that. We don't look at that kind of stuff.
Okay.
We're into two things. Can you prevent cancer? And if you got it, how you going to manage it? So usually people that are in, like, as I said, if you're in nutritional ketosis and you're super active all the time, it's going to be extremely difficult to get cancer in the first place, whether you have everything in your body is working now very healthy. That's how we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers.
So
we were surviving.
Suggesting we have a chronic approach to it.
Yeah, that's who we are. We have to always go back and look at our past. We just didn't appear on the planet 6,000 years ago. We've been a species for about 1 million years. And in that time, up until the Neolithic period about 10,000 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. We had a lot of exercise. What was killing us then? It was injuries and infections. We didn't have antibiotics or orthopedic surgeons. Now we have antibiotics and orthopedic surgeons, and we can get rid of a lot of the things that would have killed us during the Paleolithic period. And now we're dying from dementia, cancer, cardiovascular disease. We've replaced those other forms of death by chronic forms of death. And that's what we have, an epidemic of chronic diseases in this country and the world that do these kinds of diets. Our food sources are being produced in faraway countries, and they're being shipped. The tomato doesn't go bad for 6 months on a shelf. Are you kidding me? These are all engineered things, and we're eating these things. We're sitting in traffic. We're all freaked out. We can't sleep at night. All of a sudden, you get cancer, dementia, you get some other thing. It's our diet and lifestyle that's putting us at risk for these. But who wants to go back and live like a Neanderthal in a cave? Your neighbor's dog and stuff like this, right?
A lot of us have heard about the mitochondrial and metabolic interplay with Chris Palmer's work. Would you say that you're along the same lines as him? He talks about psychiatry, and you're talking about oncology, but is it the same kind of thinking?
Yes, very similar. I know Chris, we had a meeting together not long ago at the Broken Science Initiative. But yeah, he's managing neuropsychiatric depression and these kinds of disorders by putting people into ketosis. And essentially, it's a mitochondrial problem in the brain. So very interesting, like when you have Parkinson's disease, it's a mitochondrial damage. But the damage and neurons can't adapt to switching from respiration to a fermentation. So the cells essentially die. So in Parkinson's disease, you're getting the death of neurons in substantia nigra, which is a part of the brain that controls motor coordination and things like this. So you can keep those neurons alive a little bit. You give them L-DOPA and certain things like this. But essentially, if you can keep the mitochondria healthy by increasing the utilization of ketones, together again with certain drugs, you could possibly extend survival even longer. But neurons can't switch, can't upregulate, can't transition from oxidative phosphorylation to fermentation. They're not equipped to do that. So many neurons die. That's why you rarely get cancer from neurons in the brain or from cardiac myocytes. Cancer in the brain comes from glial cells, which can switch to fermentation. Cardiac myocytes in our heart that are beating all the time cannot switch to a fermentation metabolism, so you rarely, if ever, get cancer in cardiac myocytes. When you understand the biology of the organs and the cells in our body, you can clearly explain why some cells get cancer and other cells don't. And because some can ferment and some can't. If you can't ferment, you can't become a cancer cell. You've got to be able to ferment.
That's the kind of cancer that George Harrison had, was a glioblastoma then.
I don't know, George, the Beatle, the guy from the Beatles?
Yeah.
I don't know what he died from.
Oh.
Senator John McCain died from glioblastoma. So did President Biden's son, Beau Biden, and Teddy Kennedy from Massachusetts here. They all had glioblastoma because it's being mistreated. It's not being treated as a metabolic disease. And we published a paper showing that one of the standard treatments for glioblastoma is radiation. And I told them for decades, I said, this frees up massive amounts of glucose and glutamine in the tumor microenvironment. Wow. And that leads to the rapid death of these poor people. They didn't believe me. And I said, look at all the people dying. And we just came out with a paper from our Greek colleagues, Athanasios Evangelio and colleagues, and they treated a clinical treatment protocol for GBM patients. And the one glioblastoma patient, that is, and the ones that stayed adherent to the ketogenic metabolic therapy lived beyond 3 years, 68%, whereas those who didn't was only 6%. So clearly, this is just the beginning. We're going to manage these cancers really effectively. The problem is the field is not trained to know what I'm saying. They still think cancer is a genetic disease. And as long as they think that, some of them don't even think. When you ask them, what theory are you working under? They even say, what are you talking about, a theory? Man, you got to understand evolutionary biology. You got to understand what the theory is that you're working under. If the theory is not consistent with the disorder, then the outcome is never going to be optimal. Again, it has to be, people need to be trained. And the other thing too is the patients themselves better start knowing what the hell is going on. You can't be a functional illiterate when you have cancer. You really got to know what's going on. And you can't entrust your sacred soul to someone who has no clue about the underlying theory that drives their practice.
I want to ask you about weight loss in cancer. How does that play into this?
The cachexia is the tumor cells taking the muscle amino acids out of the muscle.
Okay.
Some of the amino acids will go to the liver and turn into glucose, and of course, glutamine itself can be a driving fuel for the tumor. And that's because why that happens is because the metastatic cell, which ultimately is causing the cachexia, it happens with metastasis. We have clearly shown that all metastatic cancers are macrophages, which are part of our immune system. This is another reason why a lot of these immunotherapies won't work, because the very cells that are part of the immune system, they're immunosuppressive. They have a lot of. We understand most of what's going on with the cancer. It's just that I'm frustrated by the fact that no one else seems to be able to understand it and not even be able to apply it in the clinics.
Okay.
But you're right, the cachexia weight loss. So you have two different kinds of weight loss. If you go on water-only fasting and you do therapeutic fasting, that's called therapeutic weight loss. You're losing the weight because you are not eating and your body is getting healthier and healthier with the transition over to ketones. Whereas if you're losing weight because of cachexia, that's a pathological weight loss. This is not a normal healthy weight loss, it's pathological. But once you kill those tumor cells, body's going to be able to recover itself and then regain the weight that you lost. But you got to kill the tumor cells first, and then you can regain the weight.
Okay, getting back to treatment then, clearly ketogenic diets and therapeutic fasting are the way to go. What about somebody who wants to follow a plant-based diet? Is that possible to do?
Yeah, certainly possible. They just have to measure their glucose ketone index. Much more difficult to get into the low GKI range on a plant-based diet than it is on a carnivore diet. But you can do it. So it's not like it can't be done. You might have to do more water-only fasting if you're a plant-based. That's one of the things we're in the process of doing it. You have to have diets like our friends had a calorie-restricted Mediterranean diet, calorie-restricted carnivore diet, calorie-restricted plant-based diet. All of these diets have to be tailored for gender differences, age differences, cultural differences, religious differences. All of these things have to be dovetailed into whatever group you want to call yourself. And then you simply need to know the challenges and strategies to bring your blood sugar down and your ketones up, regardless of what kind of a diet you have.
It sounds to me like dietary oncology is a niche that needs to be filled.
Oh, absolutely. If you want to live. If you want to live in a higher quality of life, if you don't want to live and you want to be miserable, then you don't want to do what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But if you want to live, I think most people would say yes. But the problem is they go to their oncologist and they get slapped down. Many oncologists say, we never heard of this. The glucose has nothing to do with cancer. So you're up against a wall of lack of knowledge. There's a massive lack of knowledge on the biology of the very disease that's being treated. How are we going to change that? We have to go back into the medical schools and we have to train the physicians to know that food can be medicine. And you need to know how food and drugs work together synergistically to manage these various diseases. And we're not getting that at all.
Well, you've written a book, you've done multiple peer-reviewed articles. What else can you do? Are you getting any pushback from traditional oncology?
So we do get some pushback, only because whenever you do anything that's changed, that requires change, people always get, well, you're changing an entire paradigm, how cancer was viewed and how it can be treated and prevented, which is not part of the mainstream textbooks of biology, biochemistry. It's not part of what we train physicians in medical schools, the pharmaceutical companies, the hospital systems, the academic industry. National Cancer Institute, NCI, says on their webpage that cancer is a genetic disease. Clearly, they're not up to date with what's going on. The pharmaceutical companies are building immunotherapies and all these things based on an incorrect theory. The hospitals are making massive amounts of revenue from drugs and radiation that generate revenue. And the poor patient just is being led around, not knowing what the hell is going on.
But do you have any hope that's going to change? Like you've published, you're speaking out.
Yeah, people want to live, it'll change. It's the bottom line. It's not going to come from the top. It's going to come from the bottom. Once people need to know this, they're going to have to put the pressure, because the guy, what do you think? The guys at the top medical schools are going to say, do a water-only fast to manage your cancer? They're going to say that. Yeah. So unless they are told, when somebody tells them, here's the evidence, you run the clinical trial, you tell me what you find, all right? And then they say, and then they've had some trials that have been out there, but they did it the wrong way. They weren't restricting. They didn't know what they were doing. And that's why people say, oh, I don't believe you until you do a clinical trial. And I said, you got to have people knowing how to run a clinical trial to do this stuff. Otherwise, you're going to get misinformation and you're going to get incorrect results. And our trial that we did with the Greeks just recently, just published a month ago, clearly showed, because I know one of the authors on that paper, he's a friend, and he worked with me in the epilepsy field for years, so I know he knows what he's talking about. And they got good results. But then you take other trials where they have no clue what they're doing, and they let the cancer patient eat tubs of lard and no exercise, and it didn't work. Man, it wouldn't work. It didn't work because you didn't do it the right way. It'd be just like somebody who's trained to use radiation therapy. They're trained to know how to treat a tumor with radiation in the brain or whatever, so smoke doesn't come out of your ears. Okay, for crying out loud, he's been trained to do that. He knows what he's supposed to do. So if you take somebody who doesn't understand metabolic therapy and you have them do this, it's not going to work. Again, it's all training. And it's all based on hard science. This is not some voodoo witch doctor stuff. This is all supported by legitimate science.
If everybody were to eat keto, or we somehow got a population shift, would we actually see cancer prevalence drop?
I don't want to say eat keto. All I would want to say is, can you get your blood sugar down and your ketones elevated? You can do that with water-only fasting, exercise, or eating foods that are low in carbohydrates. Yeah. Okay, just eat low carbohydrate foods, a lot of exercise, skip meals, get yourself back into how we were during the Paleolithic period. And yes, you're going to drop cancer death rates, no question about it. It's just that people don't do that. We're sitting in traffic. We have tremendous stress sitting in front of cell phones all day long. People getting all freaked out, right? They don't sleep at night. They have bad food. They're not happy, sitting in traffic, no exercise. We got an obesity epidemic.
Is it obesity itself that's also feeding the cancer, or is it that metabolic disease that led to obesity and cancer? Can obesity in itself be a risk factor?
Obesity is what we see. Yeah. Okay. When you look at the bloodstream of the obese person.
Yeah, they're most likely.
You also oftentimes, not all obese people. I don't want to label everybody who's obese as going to get cancer. The issue is that many obese people also have type 2 diabetes.
Yeah. Okay.
They also have it's a constellation of different provocative factors that go together. So you have microplastics. You have forever chemicals, you have no exercise, you're obese, you have high diabetes, you got all these things together, and thereby then you get cancer. Okay, not surprising.
What would you tell somebody who just got cancer? What would you advise them?
I'm not a physician. I can't advise them to do anything. Otherwise, I'm practicing medicine without a license.
All right. I'm the physician and I'm calling you for advice.
Yeah, I tell them, I give them information, the papers that we've published. In fact, we've just published a really big paper on managing glioblastoma with over 20 authors, MDs and PhDs and nutritionists and dietitians that were all on this one paper. And it spells out in a very clear way what are the options that you have to manage your cancer. Now, it was for glioblastoma, but it could work for all these cancers, even blood cancers, because they all have the same problem. All cancers are dependent on a fermentation metabolism, and they cannot generate efficient energy through oxidative phosphorylation. They're all dependent on glucose and glutamine, and they can't burn fatty acids or ketone bodies. That tells you right there. You have to go and work with a knowledgeable physician. Read the information in the paper. Both the patient and the physician are a team, and they work together and they feed off of each other because this is a work in progress. Metabolic therapy is in its infancy. Yeah. It will become the standard of care at some point in the future. I don't know when that point will be, but eventually we cannot continue to do what we are doing today. Otherwise, we're going to have 2,000 or 3,000 people a day dying from these things. We better figure out what's happening real quick. Otherwise, we're headed for a much worse situation.
So you are optimistic that your view will be adopted because there are papers being published, but it's a question of how soon that will happen.
Yeah. When the National Cancer Institute says cancer is a genetic disease and everybody's research grants are based on that, it's not going to happen anytime soon. You really have to change the entire perspective of how we deal with cancer. But also, what we have seen, which is very interesting, is that we have some people contact me, they have like prostate cancer or whatever, and then they go on metabolic therapy, but they also were obese, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, besides having cancer. And they go on metabolic therapy, and all of a sudden, cancer becomes managed, diabetes goes away, high blood pressure goes away, hypertension goes away. All these things go away because you're bringing your body back into a new state of metabolic homeostasis. You mean to tell me just doing a lot of exercise and eating the right way and taking a few drugs to target the glutamine can do all this? And the answer is yes. How come nobody knows about that?
Aside from nutritional advice that you might suggest, is there any medications on your end that you're interested in to see about?
Yes. We're very interested in parasite medications. And we're starting to see tremendous therapeutic success with some parasite medications, especially when the body is in nutritional ketosis.
You mean like ivermectin?
We haven't tried ivermectin yet, but I've tried fenbendazole and embendazole. These are a group of parasite medications.
How would that possibly be helpful?
Because the parasite and the cancer cell are using the same metabolic pathway to stay alive.
Okay.
It's not that complicated either. When you look at how does a parasite stay alive in your body? It's using the same fermentation pathway that the tumor cell uses. So when you put your body into nutritional ketosis and hit them with a simple parasite medication. Now, here's the interesting thing. Embendazole, we got to love our society. Embendazole is cheap as hell, 50 cents a tablet over in India. And it's one of these deworming parasites. As soon as they realized in this country that embendazole has some therapeutic benefit against cancer, it's now like $600 a tablet. So this is despicable. These people are immoral. You know what immorality is? When you're immoral, this is the kind of stuff you do, right? So if you're that kind of a person that would take a 50-cent tablet, remember that guy, what was his name? Martin Scarelli? He took the EpiPens and made a fortune on it only because he could. But just because you could do it doesn't mean it's moral. So you got to deal with the immorality issue.
Okay, good. We're at the end of our time, and I want to thank you so much for all of your information. What is next for you?
Next for us is to find a tumor cell that does not require glucose and glutamine. Are there any tumor cells out there that can grow in a dysregulated way and not be able to use the glucose, sugar, and the amino acid? And so far, we haven't found one. So I have a $100 bill that I'll give to my students every year. I have this $100 bill. I said, you find me a tumor that can grow without glucose and glutamine, I'll give you the $100 bill. And so far, I haven't lost it in 5 years. That's our hunt. So if we can't find a tumor that that doesn't use glucose and glutamine, then we would have to change the paradigm. But right now, the fact that we can't find anybody maybe says we're right.
Yeah.
Maybe we're right.
I think
it's a simple metabolic disease. Get over it. It's not that complicated.
We always have a final question to ask, and that would be, if you could tell a younger version of yourself something about what you've learned about cancer, or about this metabolic perspective, what would it be?
That's a hard question because everything is time and date. And 10, 20, 30 years ago, cancer was deep into the idea that it was definitely genetic and all the excitement. And no matter what I would have been able to say then, wouldn't have made any difference, because I'm saying it now because we have now come to know that none of that stuff is working well. We had to let the whole thing play out to say, okay, I've had 30 years of doing this genetic stuff, and we have more people dying a day today than we've ever had. Do you think we might want to revisit?
Yeah.
But if I had done it 30 years ago, the whole field was lockstep into this genetic thing, and anybody who thought differently was thrown under the bus, just like Otto Warburg. So you have to put everything in time. It's the way the whole ideas and concepts evolve over time before it begins to make sense. So I don't know, 20 years ago, I would have been yelling into the wind. But now we know we have a lot more scientific evidence to support what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That makes it a rational approach, for sure.
That's great. Thank you so much for your time and explaining all of this.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group, I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.